Welcome to Rules as Written, Raw. I am one of your hosts, Matt Robertson, otherwise known as Grape Ape.
And I'm Stefan Surrant, otherwise known as D and Bad Wrong Fun.
Stefan, we have a very special guest on today. I believe the creator of the most recent Goodman Games module, DCC 104, hasn't been announced or released yet that I know of. So DCC 103, the author of Bloom of the Blood Garden, Edgar Johnson. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Edgar, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Say, tell the fans who you are.
Okay. I've been around the DCC scene for probably about 10 years or so. Started in back in 2012, 2013, back in the good old Google Plus days. And friends with folks like Adam Miskevich and Wayne Snyder and James McGeorge and all those guys. And did some stuff with some zines, Metal Gods of Hadad, and done a couple modules and some other writing for Goodman Games.
Outstanding. Well, we are very pleased to have you on the show. And Stefan, we've kind of gotten away from our normal format. We've had a couple special episodes in there with Legacy. What do you say we hit Edgar up with episode 20, some episode 20 questions, just to get his little take on it?
Oh, sure. You got them ready?
I've got one of them ready while you're pulling them up. And so, Edgar, what are the rules for swimming checks? Have you ever put any kind of swimming checks in your modules, or do you got any home rules that you apply?
Oh Lord. Okay.
And no right or wrong answer here. You know, you weren't prepared for these questions.
Okay, I'm thinking swimming's got to be stamina. Maybe if somebody's submerged, you'd be thinking about giving them a choice of stamina or will, right?
Okay.
And I would say I'd break it down into segments. Depending on what they're doing, are they swimming in a calm place? They swimming in in the rapids, or are they sort of like floating down a river? And some sections are smooth, some are not. Whatever. I might make them make a test for that every time. If it's just swimming like across a little creek, it's not. I wouldn't even make them roll for something like that unless they're overburdened or wearing armor or something like that. Submerged, I think that's where the real fun begins. And then, of course, you have the drowning thing come in, so that they're going to start losing stamina at a reasonable rate until it drops to zero and they die, or they get hauled out and they roll the body.
So stamina damage. I do like that.
Yep. I remember there's not quite as, but there's some opportunity for swimming and being submerged in Bloom of the Blood Garden.
There is. And I think that anybody who's ever done a significant amount of swimming understands that it does take quite a bit of stamina.
Oh, yeah. Well, how about giant-sized weapons? Can my 5 strength wizard use the sword that a giant was just using? Do we got minimum strength requirements? Are we just like adding a static bonus onto it? Or are we upping the damage die for the weapon? I don't know. What are your thoughts on PCs using giant-sized weapons?
I'd like to see them try. I think you could probably build in something like the equivalent of an armor check penalty every time they try and swing the thing, except they're being burdened by the thing itself. Generally, though, if you're talking like a 5 strength wizard, I'd probably glance across the table, shake my head slightly, and go, "I don't think so, buddy."
That's a great idea, though.
Yeah.
Like an armor check penalty, like a weapon check penalty. For it being so big. Apologies for the dog barking, Edgar. I did want to ask one thing about the swimming before we jump off of that. How do you determine if a PC can swim or not? Is it just a luck check, or does it have to go with occupation, or just let them say yes or no?
I would say everybody has a chance to try and swim. I mean, back in my day, my grandparents had us in the pool at 2 or 3, and I've heard tales that my mom and her generation, they didn't even have anybody come out to give them lessons. It was more a matter of throw them and let them try and swim.
Mm-hmm.
So I figure anybody can jump in and give it a shot.
I've seen
I,
that John Wayne movie. You just throw the kid in the river. That's all you got to do.
Stefan,
and I would
that
assume
might
that, go ahead.
that might be why I have childhood trauma. You know.
But I would assume that somebody who is, like an elven mariner, for example, would probably
Yeah.
have some kind of possible bonus to that. Like, maybe they're gonna, if they have a saving throw for maybe they're getting tired and they're gonna drown or something. Maybe something could be built in there. I think unless you're really willing to get into the weeds with having a list of skills, I think I'm more than willing to let the player try something as long as it's physically possible, not so incredibly technical. Like, you can always try and pick a lock, but if you try and do some locksmithing, that would probably be a different thing entirely, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Edgar, have you ever played? Do you have a regular game? Have you ever played a cleric before?
That's pretty much all I ever play.
Well,
Clerics.
you might be an expert on these next questions. We had some questions about divine aid in DCC. Like, how should you? Is it always like a pass-fail result when you're calling for divine aid, and how difficult the divine aid request is? Like, how should they be able to kill the big bad guy in one prayer, or destroy a castle? What are your thoughts on that?
I think divine aid is something that people really need to take a lot harder look at. I know that we're sort of descended of the legacy of D&D, and so the die check is king, right? But if the cleric is basically just a fighter with spells who has some kind of connection to some supernatural cosmic deity type being, I think that's kind of boring. Like, think about how religion works in our world, right? You don't just get to call upon the deity. You don't just get the benefit. You have to put in the work. You got to beyond prayers. Are you really trying to bring in converts? Are you building shrines and temples to your god? Are you, kind of looking at, the sort of medieval mindset, talking about like indulgences, right? Are you buying your way into the god's favor? So maybe if you've been a good kid, maybe you've established some temples, you've smitten some enemies of your god, then maybe divine aid comes along with fewer strings attached. But I think beyond the mechanical parts of it, I think you really have to build that narrative in. It's about the relationship with the Godhead, right? And if you're gonna have that, it has to mean something. If you're gonna play a cleric, it has to mean something.
Yeah,
I
like
had made
that
a
idea.
bad call and been running it poorly because I did not remember about the deity request table that you're supposed to get every time you ask for divine aid.
Yeah,
However
and
that
I
goes.
would immediately go
Uh,
beyond that one and make it even worse, right?
yeah. Yeah, some of those are like some of them are harsher than others, for sure.
And if that person is not annoying their party constantly with trying to convert them to the faith, then they maybe aren't playing it to the hilt.
All
You
right.
gotta have that
Well,
pamphlet literature.
absolutely. The pamphlet literature is, one of the staples. But
Okay,
we're gonna
BCC chick tracks, right?
Yeah.
we are gonna get into our scheduled questions that we had for you. Stefan, you want to hit Edgar with the first one?
Absolutely. It's when should a judge apply armor check penalty?
Okay. I would say anytime it would make sense to do so. So if you ever had to walk around carrying a backpack, or if you've ever had to walk around,
Hmm.
with a bag of cement or something like that, you got to watch your footing. You're not going to be doing a whole lot of running, and if you try and do that sort of stuff, you're probably going to get hurt, right? So anytime you're asking somebody to do something that requires agility, And I don't mean just the stat, but like actual agility. If you're going to get them to waltz while wearing armor, it's gonna require a check for them to be graceful, right? If they're going to make some sort of athletic move, it's going to take something. If they're going to climb a rope, a ladder, do acrobatics, that kind of stuff. Anytime it's the stuff that you would imagine a thief doing to get away. Yes, that's going to be something you want to do the armor check.
Well, Elena, if you could bring up handout 1A for us. The rules as written book defines it on page 70. And I remember this time, Stefan, we are using the 8th printing PDF of the DCC RPG. It's the most commonly known that everyone has. So that's the one we use if you ever want to look it up. Warriors who wear plate mail find that weight inhibits their ability to jump chasms, as do thieves when they try to scale a wall. The check penalty applies to climbing, jumping, balancing, swimming, moving silently, and other such physical activities. So it definitely defines it as physical activity right there. This question got me kind of pondering and thinking a little bit. So I threw in some little slides here that where my thinking was kind of branching off. But what's your opinion right off the bat, Stefan?
Yeah, really along the lines of what we've already said. Anytime that it's something that needs a little grace, a little dexterity or agility, whatever you want to call it, I'm using that. And generally, anytime an agility check is called for, but other times also, like just when being heavier would make it harder, like climbing a wall. You can kind of use the thief skills chart to become a little bit of a basis because it has like asterisks on it on some of the skills that say armor check penalty will affect this.
Elena, if you could bring up handout 1E for us. We've got some average cases here of how to make a skill check, how to make an ability check. So on page 67, it says balancing is agility based. Breaking down doors, bending bars, lifting gates, strength, climbing, strength or agility, depending. Listening is luck, searching and spotting, intelligence, and sneaking is agility. So, based on our rules, these physical activities that take agility and strength or stamina, that would be balancing, breaking down doors, sneaking, and climbing, would be the way the book defines it. Do you guys agree with that so far?
Oh yeah.
I might even go one further, just beyond that. Anybody who's ever played like middle school or high school football, have those August practices. You start putting those pads on, and it's super hot. It really takes it out of you. So I think I had something in Moon Slaves of the Cannibal Kingdom where they're in the jungle, right? It is hot. So after a while, wearing heavy armor begins to wear on you in ways that it wouldn't normally in more temperate climes, right? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
2-a-days, and
I
I think I've seen that before in other modules as well.
Same. I haven't played that one, but yeah, I've seen it in other modules as well.
All right, so one of my tangents was, Elena, if you could bring up handout 1DD, 1 double D. If an ability check is already determined at a specific DC, isn't the armor check penalty already taken into account? So, Elena, if you could bring up handout 1D for us after that. And page 66, it kind of explains DC 5 skill check, DC 5 ability check, DC 10, DC 15, DC 20. And so it defines these skill checks. A DC 10 tasks are a man or a woman's deed. The weak and unskilled cannot likely achieve these tasks. Example, kicking down a door, scaling a stone wall, or hearing the approach of a cautious footpad. A DC 15 tasks are feat of daring do. Take someone special to accomplish these tasks. Example, leaping the gap between two city roofs, hurling a log at an oncoming bear, or grabbing a pouch latched to the saddle of a galloping stallion. So, if you are already setting a DC for these ability checks, you're saying a DC 15 is from jump from one building to the next. Would it makes sense that the armor check penalty might already be incorporated into that check? Would they
Nah.
need to be penalized again?
I mean,
because it's for the party, right? It's for the party. It's not for
nobody's
that
ability
individual.
nobody's ability modifier bonus for individual PCs has been taken into account. That's just a flat DC. That hasn't been taken into account the same way an armor check penalty hasn't.
Edgar, what are your thoughts?
I think that they set the DCs for the party, right? Individuals within that party have their own circumstances, including wearing armor, including their attributes and that kind of stuff. So it sets a threshold that each individual is going to have to meet if they're going to try and attempt that check.
Okay.
And if they're wearing armor,
just a little tangent I went off on.
Right.
So handout 1F, page 78, it says agility modifies missile fire attacks, making missile fire attacks and melee attacks physical activities. Would and should armor check penalties go against attack rolls? On the same hand, if you've got a DC that's solid and it's for the party, if you've got a attack roll with a static AC that you're trying to hit, does it make sense that the warrior in plate mail it moves or holds shoots a bow slower?
I don't think so. I think, especially when you have something that gives you mechanical advantage, like a bow or a crossbow or something like that. But maybe if somebody is attempting to like throw a spear a long way, maybe that's a thing.
I mean, if I'm wearing my clothes at the Renaissance Fair, I can imagine I would be able to shoot a longbow a lot easier than if you strapped chain mail on me and it's, pinching my nipples
So
and stuff like that. And
I will give you an answer that I think Bob would be very proud of. This is an armor check penalty. It is applied to checks. It is not applied to attack rolls, which is what you were just talking about.
yes, outstanding answer. Well, and I'm not advocating for that. I'm just trying to get the wheels
No,
turning here.
I've seen the question asked online. I've seen people ask that, so it is good to bring up.
Yeah, what
Now,
you said.
my last tangent for this question, Elaine, if you could bring up handout 1C, does it make sense that the dwarves don't take a movement penalty because they might be so adept at wearing armor? A stout, stocky little dwarf, low center of gravity, made to bear loads, made to move that plate mail. Because a dwarf wearing plate mail is moving at 10 feet. I mean, it's very debilitating for in combat, especially if you're using miniatures or a VTT and ranges. That dwarf is going to be out of combat a lot at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Edgar? Can I
I
convince you of that one?
I'm gonna have to admit that when it comes to movement, I'm the laziest person as a judge that there can be. I don't really use that rule. Um, I mean, it's difficult to keep track, especially with a party that's been together for a while, and they keep occasionally getting new stuff, like who's wearing what, which guy. If you got people running like 2 or 3 characters at a time. So it gets a little persnickety. But as far as the question goes, if you do the rules as written, I would have to say that would apply. Like the dwarf does not have any special ability that says you're a pack mule and you can carry armor like nobody else.
True.
So if that were the case, sure. If they had like some, some bonus that says, well, you travel slower, but you're not affected by the weight of armor, that'd be a different thing. But that ain't there.
Stefan, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, along the same lines. Rules as written, there's nothing that says dwarves are not affected. So they are. And yeah, dwarven plate mail is gonna go 10 feet around. In play, I don't run things on a grid. I do theater of the mind, and most of the time when someone goes, "Hey, am I close enough to attack this guy?" It's yeah, sure. Because otherwise they don't get to do anything that round. And
I love
so
running stuff on a grid, so I am one of those judges that likes distance and all that
yeah.
stuff, tokens. But yeah, I mean, I think if we ever did get a DCC RPG 2.0,
Yeah,
that could be
advanced
another
DCC.
another little ability in there for the dwarves that they're because they already have a little bit of a precedence being sword and board experts.
Mm-hmm.
They are adept at using shields, which is armament, as long as with their weapons. So I can see it.
If it really doesn't make sense for me to let that heavy dwarf get up there, I will say no. You can get halfway there, but remember you got a crossbow, and just try to give him a little something because no one likes spending their round just moving.
Now, lo and behold, as I was researching these questions, Edgar, I checked the forum sometimes I check the forum just see if I can get a comment from JG, the Dark Master. And Elaine, if you could bring up handout 1CC, Dreamslinger on June 8th, 2011 had the same thought as me, and he's like, it doesn't seem that right that a dwarf loses half their speed, when a human only loses a third. And JG says, fair point. Give it a shot and play and let me know how it goes. I mean, I feel like that's Dark Master approval right there.
Yeah, you always have the approval to do whatever the heck you want at your table.
This is true.
Especially when it comes to enforcing that iron rule for your elves.
Amen.
I do like it. I do like a little extra iron damage. Edgar, so final answer on this question. Well, we'll go to Stefan and I first, and then we let you have the last word. Stefan, when should a judge apply the armor check penalty?
Always. At least for movement, no matter who you are, and generally with agility checks. They give examples. You can look at what's given. You can look at thief skills. You can figure it out, but generally when it makes sense, and it'll be pretty obvious.
My rules as written would be check page 67 and page 70. And those will, physical activities, swimming, jumping, balancing, moving silently, those will be your armor check penalty instances. And Edgar, you do get the last word. So, what is your final answer on that?
I would say go with the rules and do it when it makes sense. But remember the first rule, which is you're the judge, you're trying to have a good time with your players. And if that's a rule that ends up coming up a lot and resulting in a lot of rancor at the table for whatever reason, then play it differently. Play it so it's fun for the group.
Yeah, you don't want the group to have a bad time. So,
All right, on to question number dos.
Hit us, Stefan. What is it?
All right. Are swarms counted as one target for spells like sleep or other area of effect attacks?
Edgar, what do you think?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. I agree with you. Elena, if you could bring up handout, there's a few swarms. There's 4 swarms identified in our DCC RPG, and I think I highlighted a couple of them here. Elena, if you could bring up handout 2A, the first is the Bat Swarm, and it says they occupy the space of 20 feet to either side. The swarm can bite all the targets within that space. So 20 by 20, they're biting everyone there. They do 1 attack roll, and it hits everybody. On the same note, that swarm is 1 entity. So when you attack them, you attack the whole thing. Is that how you think of it, Stefan?
Oh yeah. If you're trying to cast sleep on the swarm and it succeeds and the swarm fails its will save, the whole thing goes to sleep. If for some reason your sleep doesn't take effect, successful casting, but it passes the will save, yeah, I'll throw you a little descriptive oh yeah, you see 1 rat start taking a nap. But the swarm as a threatening function is still going.
I love a good swarm. Edgar, do you got? Let me see. I believe there's a swarm in Bloom of the Blood Garden. Swarm or 2. There's a tree with 4 sections. I want to say there was a swarm there, wasn't there?
I don't think so.
I think that was. I don't think so. There probably was a swarm at some point because that is an enormous module.
I think it's in the
so many
middle.
branching paths. But
so let's see. I think it's in the
you
middle
threw
area.
that tree at me, and I remember fighting individual enemies.
I want to say I remember one, but it's been a while now. Edgar, can you verify if there's any swarms in that module?
I don't think there are. I don't
No?
like maybe it's just old man brain, but I don't seem to recall anything.
Do you like swarms? Do you actively write swarms into your modules, or you tend to stay away from them?
I don't necessarily. When I think about swarms, it's gotta if you're gonna unleash a swarm on somebody, it's got to be surprising and horrible and kind of overwhelming. And it's, I mean, if you cast sleep, that's great. If you can put it away quick, that's great. But I don't know. Growing up in Atlanta as a kid, living in kind of a poor neighborhood, we had swarms of roaches.
Yeah.
And
Swarms are best when they're really, really gross.
when they're really, really gross, and you just want to get away from them.
Yeah, they can be traumatizing. Elena, if you could bring up handout 2C, I believe this is a 4th level cleric spell, 3rd or 4th, but it's called Vermin Blight. The cleric summons a single insect swarm. That swarm attacks any creatures within its area, but does not move from that spot, meaning it attacks friend and foe when the caster summons it. The swarm receives +2 bonus to attacks and damage, or +3 against unholy creatures. But the reason I bring that up is because it earlier on it tells you to identify an insect swarm on page 19. So Elaine, if you could bring up handout 2B for us, here's another one of our swarms. An insect swarm is a mass of flying wasps, ants, horseflies, bees, and other noxious pets. 20 by 20 area. Inflict bite, damages everyone within that space. Fort save from the stings. Swarms also take half damage from any attack that is not an area of effect.
Oh, yeah.
So not only do area of effects target the entire swarm, but they're actually preferred usage when fighting swarms. Because, if you're swinging a sword or just a club, that's going to be half damage. So swarms can be pretty formidable opponents. We do have some handouts from Ravencrow King, our friend Daniel Bishop. Elaine, if you could bring up handout 2D, he wrote a blog about swarms, giving us Crit Table S, the swarms.
I was wondering where this came from.
I did not know that, so yeah, I was very pleased to find this. This actually is not an official document, so ignore those officials down there.
I was about to ask. But cool. This is definitely a good thing to use. Yeah, swarms. It just makes sense that they would have a little bit of a different crit chart.
Yeah, I do, and he's got a whole list. So he talks about the Appendix N covers and how there's swarms on them. So Elena, if you could bring up handout 2E as well. And I sent you the link, Elena. If you could post that link in the chat, that is the blog post for Daniel Bishop's Swarm blog. But final notes on Swarm crits and fumbles. A crit is a crit against everyone, he says. So if that swarm rolls a 20, have each character make a luck check to see if they avoid the critical effect. Each character who fails has to roll their own critical effects. So the swarm can have multiple crit effects depending on the person, because you got everybody getting bit by all kinds of rats or whatnot. Mm-hmm. If the swarm fumbles, then it fumbles on all the attacks. Rather than trying to figure out what that means, he said, consider having the swarm break off its attacks or disperse. So that swarm just might spread out. Edgar, what do you think about those?
I love it. I think that's a great rules addition. And knowing Daniel, I would have a hard time figuring out where to find that, because he's written, I don't know,
so much,
a lot,
5 million words on DCC, I think.
Well, luckily I do have the link, and I can send it to you later. But
great.
Stefan, any thoughts on swarms? Final.
It's one target. If you you're not putting half the rats to sleep, you're putting all the rats to sleep. So.
And those 2 handouts by Daniel Bishop were not official. They should have had the unofficial stamp on there.
But they are very cool.
All right. So my answer is, are swarms counted as one target for spells like sleep and other area of effects? Yes, they are. A swarm, even though it's hundreds or possibly thousands of creatures, they are counted as one target, and area of effects are actually preferred to battle them. Stefan, you gave your answer. Edgar, what is your final word on that matter?
Yes, and learn Fireball if you can.
I'm pretty sure that was even in the blog somewhere. All right, so our next question, this one came up at GaryCon, and I immediately sent it over to Stefan. Can a wizard's familiar be healed? What do you think about this one, Edgar?
As a longtime cleric, I would say not with lay on hands, unless the god is somehow connected to the animal in question. I'd say that we could allow for something like natural healing, that sort of 1 point per day, if you get sufficient, allow the familiars to get some sufficient rest. But beyond that, unless you want to quest for some kind of tonic or something of that nature, I'd say natural healing only.
Okay.
Stefan, what are your thoughts?
I would have said yes. I don't see why not. Especially if you're a lawful cleric and the wizard has the lawful guardian or traditionally lawful guardian familiar. If you're a lawful cleric and they have a demonic familiar, you should probably just automatically take a point of disapproval for that. But I would still say that you can. Yourself,
I,
Matt?
I think I might have to agree. And I think I might have some evidence. Elena, if you could bring up handout 3A. This talks about our familiars. On page 316, it says all familiars have these traits, and I highlighted 2 of them. There's more. But they all have hit points. They all have 1d4 plus 2 hit points, which denotes them as being a living thing, right? They're a creation. They're magical, but they have a set amount of life points, which is kind of my interpretation. And they use the wizard's savings throws. So that means they're connected to your PC, which makes them maybe like half a character out of game. And Elena, if you could bring up handout 3B, the reason why I think you might be able to heal them is because on page 30, it says clerics heal the faithful, kind of like Edgar said. If they are connected to the deity, then I would say absolutely they could heal it. But it goes on to say, by making a spell check, a cleric may lay on hands to heal damage to any living creature. So it's those words right there that give me pause to think that maybe the familiar could be healed. The cleric cannot heal undead and unanimated objects like living statues, extraplanar creatures like demons, devils, or elementals, or constructs like golems. So then we have to go look at the familiar configuration table. You've got eagles, badgers, white cats, wolverines, any kind of animal I believe could be healed. But then you got this miniature armored knight. That sounds like a construct to me. And then, you've got tiny demons, skeletal rats. So I would have to say that maybe it depends on your familiar, but if it's living, I would think maybe it could be healed. Edgar, does that change your opinion at all?
I don't necessarily think so. I think like if you have a cleric who's well in touch with the demonic, perhaps that person can do a demonic familiar a solid, right?
Yeah.
In service of the god, because what you're doing is you're channeling the godhead, right? So what's going to happen, what kind of power gets applied, depends on whether that is pleasing to the god or not, right? And of course, there's consequences, like you said. If you have a lawful cleric trying to do good for chaotic creatures, that should be an issue, especially if it's well, maybe not especially, but even if it's a familiar.
Do you have any instances or cases of familiars in your modules? Any?
I haven't messed around with familiars at all.
No.
The closest thing I could think of is in Moonslaves. There is a witch who creates frightening little dolls, and they're constructs.
Speaking of witches, we have something for that. Elena, if you can bring up handout 3D, On page 434 in our kind of monsters descriptions in the DCC RPG, it says if a witch is killed while the familiar still lives. Well, first it says every witch has a familiar. And it says if the witch is killed while the familiar still lives, the witch's soul flees to that familiar's body, which runs away to restore its power to fight another day. So kind of like an escape clause for any kind of witch anywhere. So we could definitely add a familiar, and it would make sense that they're one of these little constructs is like the leader of the constructs, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to change my answer to be. I mean, my answer is already kind of a little bit iffy. Um, but looking at the evidence here a little bit more, and also seeing the familiar physical configuration table, which I don't think we have a handout for, but one of the results on there is giant ant, and another is extraplanar ant. So by that implication, some of these creatures are extraplanar and some are not. Um, and I is it did we show what handout 3C yet? I think if we
Not
get that,
yet. Do you want to bring that one up?
yeah, if we can get handout 3C up, we'll see that this talks about a fragment of the wizard's soul being imbued in the familiar. And I believe this is specifically for the demonic familiar.
Yeah, this is definitely for the demonic one. That if your wizard dies, they can cohabitate the familiar's body for all eternity, or until the familiar's physical
Mm-hmm.
form is slain. So once that wizard's
Oh.
soul moves into the familiar, the wizard is your player becomes the familiar. That's their character.
So
Uh,
so we have
and-
some kind of shared soul stuff going on, but I think generally if your familiar is like a hawk, or a lizard or a spider monkey or a snake, um, it's an animal that you've kind of you've bonded with in some way. So it's still just an animal, and I think you could heal that just the same as you could a sick cow if you wanted to use lay on hands to help out a sick cow. But yeah, if it's a construct, you'd have to be a specifically a Dane'Thar, a cleric of Dane'Thar, and be using the bonus lay on hand stuff from the annual, and you probably can't at all for anything that appears to be extra planar.
so let me ask you this, Edgar. Since you play a cleric quite a bit, has there ever been any cases or instances in any games you've played in where you have healed other things, be it creatures, monsters, beasts, besides party members?
I believe that we did heal a pack mule.
And so
I
I'm
have
wondering if a
it.
familiar. Well, so let me tell you what happened. We're playing at GaryCon, and these people, they love to send their familiars into rooms to check it out. I'm not sure
Hmm.
why, because they take double hit points when they die. But the familiar goes in there, uh, falls prey to whatever monster is in there, and the wizard's dead, laying on the ground dead. And we're like, well, hurry, heal the familiar, because the cleric was over by the familiar and not by the wizard. And so we were thinking, this is probably definitely not rules as written, but if you could heal that familiar, would it replenish or replace that hit point loss that the wizard just suffered?
If they're connected, I would say so. If you're allowing
Yeah.
that to happen, I would only allow that to happen if it's in furtherance of the god's aims, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
I'd say
they're
I
and
like
think
if it's like Jake and Elwood Blues on a mission from God, then obviously.
well, and I would say also that you only have since a familiar is only like 1d4, they're a one hit die creature. You only have that one round. If you're going to allow healing of familiars, you got one round and then that's it. Then that magic is broken. That connection is severed. In my
I,
opinion.
I mean their HP might be a little bit like the guardian familiar. It gets an extra hit die.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
yeah, because all familiars get 1d4 plus 2. The guardian gets an extra 1d4 plus 2.
Oh. So would you give a guardian familiar 2 rounds to be healed?
Why not?
I mean, yeah, why not?
2 hit dice. So let's make our decisions here. The question is can a wizard's familiar be healed? My answer, rules as written, is going to be yes. The wizard's familiar can be healed because it is a living creature, as long as it goes with the character's alignment. Kind of like Edgar said, if it was a demon or a devil, if it's chaotic cleric who's really in touch with demonology, then yeah, of course I would allow it. Stefan, what do you think?
I'll say yes, but highly dependent on the physical appearance of the familiar, and also somewhat on just the type. If it's guardian, arcane, focal, demonic.
All right, Edgar,
Uh,
what is your. Sorry, Stefan.
no, go.
Edgar, what is your final ruling on this question?
I would say yes if the circumstances make it make sense. And I think I would add on to that. There's a fairly interesting situation that the party can get into if the character dies but the familiar lives. What if you do have that person go into that creature and then eventually somehow get reconstituted? Would they, I'm thinking especially of it's in Appendix N, but Robin Hobb's Assassin Apprentice series. The protagonist ends up inside of his wolf, sort of familiar for quite some time, and when he gets back out, he does not act right. He has to be retrained to act like a human being again.
Ooh, I like that. That is a very nice story touch. All right, Stefan, what is our fourth question for today?
It ties back into this one quite a bit. It's when a familiar dies, the wizard loses double the HP of the familiar. Can that hit point loss be healed? Restore vitality, etc.
Edgar, what do you think?
I think so, but again, if you're choosing Restore Vitality, which is a cleric spell, then you better be on the right side of whatever god you're representing.
And that's even noted in the DCC RPG. I think maybe more than once, at least once, maybe a couple times. Joseph says,
Yeah,
we had
it's
this pairing between the wizard and the clerics where they were trying to be buddy buddy, and the gods would not be happy with that.
yeah. I'm 99% sure. Yes, indeed. I'm looking. There's it. It's in the general description for the restore vitality spell, mostly pertaining to restoring spell burn that had been burnt that a minute beforehand.
Well, Elaine, if you could bring up handout 4A, what we've been talking about is on page 141. It says, if a familiar dies, the caster immediately kills over in intense pain, loses twice the familiar's hit points permanently, and suffers a -5 spell check penalty until the next full moon. So that could be from 1 to 30 days. It's pretty a severe penalty if a familiar dies. And it does denote that the hit points are lost permanently.
Yep.
Which means that they're not going to come back with rest, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. That your new maximum is going to be really low if it's higher than 0.
Right. Edgar, is that how you see it as well?
Absolutely, and you better hope you don't have a guardian familiar if you're wizard
Yeah.
with double the hit points. I did run across something kind of interesting in the book. In the Mercurial Magic table, one of the effects is that a spell causes terror. The familiar is immune to that terror effect from the Mercurial. So there's also benefits the familiar gets simply by being attached to the wizard in question.
That is
That makes
true.
sense. I mean, you can
Especially,
normally cast through the familiar, so
well, especially
the
if it's a focal familiar.
For
That's kind
sure.
of their entire purpose.
Mhm.
So handout 4B, Elena, if you could please bring that up. On page 94, it says, note that some crits may create permanent injuries, which can only be healed by magical or extraordinary means. So it does still create a small little precedence that they can be healed. So I wouldn't say you would never be able to get those hit points back. But before we answer this one, Stefan, can we add question 5 to this? Because I think it goes with it.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Question 5 is can stat loss from rolling the body be healed or replenished? So, well, again, we're talking about restore vitality or the good old quest for it.
That's my answer.
So, stat loss from rolling the body, can it be healed or replenished? That stat loss declares that it's permanent. If you're rolling the body, it's a 1d3 to randomly choose, and you're going to lose a point permanently. There's a lot of permanent stat loss. But I did find this in the spell Restore Vitality. Elena, if you could bring up handout 5A. This is a regular, easily achievable result. Page 279, with a result of 20 or 21, especially, I think it's a second or third level spell, so you're getting bonuses already. The Cleric's Restore ability, score drain, even if it is permanent in nature. So right there, it says it can reverse permanent loss. If you scroll down to the bottom of that, it says the cleric can heal 2d4 plus class level of hit points of damage up to the target's maximum. I would argue that healing could restore those permanent hit point losses. Now, it says up to the target's maximum, but it also says it can heal permanent damage in nature. So it kind of contradicts itself. Edgar, what are your thoughts on that?
I think your first interpretation sounds correct. If it says that it can heal permanent damage, then it can heal permanent damage. But again, we got to go back to this is a cleric, you're dealing with gods, and I could see plenty of arguments to be made for why it wouldn't work in some circumstances.
Absolutely.
Stefan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's much more easily going to I don't think that many gods would be upset by the restoration of, roll the body damage, but any chicanery that came about because of magic, I think more gods would be opposed to. So you do that, and yeah, maybe it works, and then maybe you immediately are told, no more of that spell until you do this for me.
I kind of like that because you don't know that you did something wrong until you do it wrong, right? So, like, until you get that little slap on the wrist, maybe it's a kind of benevolent God, benevolent judge. Try to heal that permanent hit point loss because playing a wizard with 2 hit points is, I mean, you're marked for death at that point.
Yeah.
One of the handouts we missed was, Elena, if you could bring up handout 3E. This was in regards to the familiar itself, where I was kind of posing evidence against my own opinion. But on page 93, it says a character or monster dies when it reaches 0 hit points. I would say a character, monster, or familiar, and group them in whichever class you want, with the characters or with the creatures or monsters. But if that familiar died at 0 hit points, it might not have a chance to be healed. I guess so. Let's say, and you're running a game or you're writing a module. Let's say you have a healer or a spellcaster in the module. Would they be able to heal other creatures that are under their purview or under their control
once they hit 0?
Yeah.
I would say probably so. Especially in the case of a familiar where you have that solid link between the character and the familiar, where part of a PC is inside of the familiar, part of the familiar is inside of the PC, then that link I think would be the key. Like that's why I would allow it.
Yeah. Stefan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, along the same, really the exact same. I don't think I've got anything more intelligent to add than Edgar.
If the familiar reaches 0 hit points, I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'd be rules as written. So I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it would kind of be. It depends on what you classify the familiar as. Do you classify it as a monster? Do you classify it as a creature? Do you classify it as part of the character?
I mean, it's not the character. It's definitely a separate creature. And
But the
it has
character
a
is
monster.
playing it. I mean, the player is playing it.
I think that's up to your table.
They're a swarm.
Maybe. Well, we have one last question, Matt, but we also got to get off in about 5 minutes
I was gonna
Matt
save
for
that.
the other
Yeah,
Matt and Eddie.
I was gonna save that for next episode. I just had that there for insurance purposes, but we do need our final answer on questions 4 and 5. So when a familiar dies, the wizard loses double the hit points of that familiar and a -5 bonus, -5 penalty. Can that hit point loss be healed or replenished with Restore Vitality? So I'm going to say my answer rules is written that hit point loss cannot be healed through normal means, even through lay on hands magical means. It would only be able to be healed by something that restores permanent loss. Rules is written is what I think. Stefan, what do you think?
I think you could use Restore Vitality, but you're going to get a slap on the hands and be told to go quest, like I already kind of mentioned. But you should probably have planned better and take your lumps when you get them.
And don't send your familiars in there first.
Don't do that, guys. Don't do that.
Edgar, what is your final answer on the matter?
I think it can, kind of within the boundaries of, does it make sense for that cleric's god to approve that kind of healing, and at what price, as you said, right?
Absolutely. So our last question, question 5. Let's get our final answers on this. Stephanie, you want to go first on this one? And what the question was?
Yeah. So the question was just, can a familiar or when a familiar dies and the wizard takes, that permanent hit point loss damage, can that be healed? Can't be healed. My final answer, not normally. You got to quest for it, find a fancy potion, or use Restore Vitality and hope that god kind of likes you enough to let that happen.
I think you're talking about question 3 there, Stefan. Question 5.
Question 5, the stat
Question
loss.
5 was our
I was
last.
still on that. Yes. Can stat loss be from rolling the body be healed or replenished? Yes, and basically the same answer though.
I have to agree, yes. But I think when it even says rolling the body, I want to say there's a little blurb in there that says this cannot be healed. I'm not sure if it does or not. But I would say if you get something that says it can reverse permanent damage, then that's what it does. It reverses permanent damage. And a 20 on Restore Vitality indeed does that. Edgar, what do you think for that last question?
I think you're both spot on that Restore Vitality can do that, and it might be even more interesting to have Restore Vitality go along with quest for it. So maybe that person has to keep coming back to the cleric. Maybe that person has to make sacrifices to this god. Maybe that person needs gets addicted to some brew that the cleric makes that first taste is free, but after that you got to pay, right?
I like that. Have you ever had a chance to use Restore Vitality in your playings of a cleric?
No, I have not. I've that was not a spell that I had.
I've had clerics do it when I'm judging, and I was too lenient. I'll just put it at that.
Well, Edgar, we are reaching the limits of our time. Do you got anything? Any secrets you can tell us? Anything you're working on? What might be coming down the pipe?
Is there another big sandbox you're thinking about? And
everybody always comes in here and tells one secret.
One secret is I've been thinking about a lot of different ways to do something in that regard, but I don't have anybody to give it to yet.
All right.
All right.
It's not really a secret, I guess.
Is there anything you would like to promote? Anything you got coming up or going on?
Not really. It's just I'm on my spring break. We're just sort of chilling at home, doing a lot of yard work and stuff.
DCC 103 is out, Bloom of the Blood Garden. Do you want to give us a little synopsis of what the players can expect if they pick this up?
Okay. This is a game that potentially could wreck any judge's campaign. Go into it with an open mind. Let the players exercise their agency and make some choices. There's lots of choices to be made, some of them pretty impactful. And this is an opportunity to look at how things affect a small community and how big things might come out of the effects. I think back to like, in Lord of the Rings, the Shire is just a little place. But once you start messing around in that little place, lots of things can come out of it.
Yep.
Sometimes they're going to be great, and sometimes they're going to be horrible.
Outstanding. Stephanie, you got anything coming up?
Well, I've shipped out all my Kickstarter stuff, and Goodman Games will be putting it. I don't know if they're receiving it at some point this week. It'll be in the warehouse for a while and then be on the store. But got a pamphleted funnel adventure that'll start your campaign in Elfland, and you can run a funnel in under 2 hours. I got a setting guide, Elfland Beyond the Fields We Know, for running your whole campaign in Elfland.
That's a nice shiny looking cover too.
And two adventures also. So you can level 2 adventures. One, Winnie the Pooh's public domain. So I had a fun thing with that. Go help out Christopher Robin. And the other's based off Beauty and the Beast. So there might be a big mansion with a bunch of furniture that tries to mess you up.
Well, I ran my playtest, the Golden Idol Entradar at GaryCon twice. Had Corey Welch in that game, and had a great time with him. Had a great time at GaryCon, but it showed off some exclusive Davin Klutz art that's going to be coming up. So look for that on Kickstarter soon. This Friday, we've got the Reaver Express returning, and they will be finishing Escape from the Shrouded Fen. And our raffle for that will be an autographed copy of the module by creator Terry Olson. So
awesome.
Tune in for that. We usually give that raffle away right after the break. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time, where our guest will be Bob Brinkman. We need to confirm with him, but on April 18th, Bob will come back and tell us what we got right and what we got wrong.
All right. Y'all stick around to watch the No Class RPG show, though. Matt and Eddie are going to have a fun time.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Edgar. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.